Stranger Things has just done what many properties before it has done, which is splitting a season into two different parts. And that's not always a bad thing. Like, those of us who watched and were disappointed by Game of Thrones could probably tell you that more episodes is not always bad. But in this situation, it's obvious that if you look into the structure of the show in terms of storytelling, that this is about stretching the show out and holding on to a waning subscriber base for Netflix, which makes the show not as much viable in terms of storytelling. Netflix is an odd beast, and I'll probably tackle that in another video, but they've lost a lot of cachet in the last couple years. Marvel properties have reverted to Disney and can now be found on Disney+. Some of their most popular shows, like Orange is the New Black and House of Cards, have completed. But not only that, House of Cards had a really bad scandal where one of the stars was found to be a predator, which throws some shade over a well-acclaimed television show. There are still a number of really popular shows being made for Netflix, like Nailed It, but the market has really become saturated with streaming services, and at this point, it's pretty easy to think, oh, well, Netflix has gotten too expensive, or Netflix has made some moral choices I don't necessarily agree with, and just cancel your subscription. So that takes us back to Stranger Things Season 4. Part 1 was released in May, and the second part will be released July 1st, which is next week. I am excited. I will say I am looking forward to it. I'm sure if you're watching this video, then you've already seen the show, but let me just kind of break down the structure a little bit of the season. The first few episodes set up the conflict and like the team-ups this season. 1, the Byers kids and company. 2, Joyce and Doc Brown's fabulous adventure. 3, 11, and 4, the kids and Hawkins. Secondarily, Hopper's in a gulag, which for some reason was filmed in a POW camp where Nazis kept Roma and Jews, which is super great. It's pretty obvious from a writing standpoint this season could have been sliced pretty neatly in half. On one side, we have all the stuff that drives the plot forward and needs to happen and makes sense and actually feels like true and honest character-wise, and on the other side, we just have a bunch of banana shit they throw in to take up space. 11's arc this season was necessary, but it was totally bungled. She wants to fit in desperately, she struggles with losing her powers and losing her father, and she feels that loss of the only parental figure she's ever really had. And she wants to get her powers back, she doesn't feel special anymore, and as the audience, we know that she doesn't need powers to be special. She's special the way she is. She's a person. But her journey to self-love and self-acceptance is through self-empowerment and hopefully through being reunited with her father. I also love the section with the Hawkins kids. This is just great. This is the stuff we love the show for, right? The show has no problem with integrating new characters and casting the right actors. I really like how the present in Hawkins is reflected in Eleven's past, and I liked the way those two were cut together. The editing in this season was very good. This season's big bad is like a scary, cool, creepy villain that we don't fully understand and can't understand the motivations of until later. He has a really compelling origin story. I really like what this season has done to expand and kind of solidify the lore of the show, which has always been pretty flexible. It makes sense and it's really well done. Now to the mess. And it is a messy, messy mess. Let me tell you. Joyce. A flawed mother, certainly. Not a perfect person, but devoted to her sons. And this season we just see a complete disregard for that characterization. Joyce has adopted 11, and she already had a really close relationship with both of her sons, particularly Will. Her parenting and the ways that she has both failed and helped her kids is really important to the show. And this season, she just, fucks off to save Hopper? I'm not saying Hopper isn't worth saving, but Joyce is a single mother. Her ex-husband has no interest in their kids, and he was a piece of shit anyway. She has 3 teenagers who are dependent upon her, not just financially, but emotionally. All of them have serious emotional problems, and she risks her life on a mission without any regard to the potential consequences. We also don't see her having any meaningful interactions with the kids this season, and all of them are in crisis in some way or another. They all need her right now, and she isn't present for them. She also, this is very basic, but doesn't leave a phone number or tell an adult where she's going. It's one thing to leave your mostly grown kids for a couple days for a business trip, and it's another thing to
fly to Alaska to meet with an unknown and possibly dangerous individual while carrying a lot of cash.
If she had died, the consequences would have been dire. She would have orphaned her kids and left them financially dependent on her 18-year-old. Obviously, Joyce wasn't gonna die here. She has plot armor, she's too important. She needs to live, and Hopper needed to be rescued. But that means that this trip has just 0 stakes. And low stakes doesn't make something uninteresting, but in this case, there's nothing new or exciting about this plot. Like, we all know how a basic operation is supposed to go to rescue someone, so what was the point in showing us all of this? Boring, boring, boring. Hopper gets like 2 good monologues, and other than that, this was completely useless to us. I think it would have been more interesting if Joyce had supposedly left town on a business trip and we don't see where she's going or what's going on with her. And then she appears back in with Hopper like Dad Ex Machina later in an important time. That way, Hopper gets his moment of triumph without having to deal with all this bleak shit. Like, Hopper has already had his bleak moments. He's hit rock bottom before. This is unnecessary for us to see as an audience. Speaking of unnecessary, the Byers kids this season. The moment when they went on a trip to Utah was when I was fully like, oh, they had no idea what to do with these kids right now. They just needed them to do something. And I think that shows a certain lack of imagination and a serious lack of forethought in terms of who was going to be where at what time. They just needed something to occupy these kids with in order to move the plot along and keep them from getting anywhere they didn't need to be yet. And this was just so deeply lazy and boring and unnecessary. They just decided to send them on a wild goose chase instead of actually figuring out what would made sense.
Speaking of things not making sense.
Further rumination on the Nancy, Jonathan, Steve love triangle. I hate it.
I hate it.
It is very realistic that teenagers doing long distance would have conflict in their relationship and have, like, communication issues, but I'm so deeply bored by it. Like, I was viscerally groaning in the moments where, like, Jonathan was having his uncomfortable conversation with his friend about Nancy. I'm not interested in the demands of Nancy Wheeler's fickle heart. And I like Nancy. I like her a lot. I think it's a disservice to her character that the writers are like going all the way back to season 1 and 2. Like, this is very bad. We've already litigated this. She's moved on. Steve's moved on. It is an insult to our intelligence as viewers to circle back to this. And I'm not invested in her relationship with Jonathan. I mean, they're teenagers. I'd be totally fine with them breaking up and her moving on with her life, going to J school, doing what you gotta do. But, this is dumb. I don't understand why they couldn't think of another way to add tension to this group of characters if they wanted to. And I think the reason they did this is that someone's gonna die and it's gonna be Steve, and they want it to be meaningful that he sacrifices himself for Nancy. But I also think that's stupid. You don't need romantic tension with someone for your sacrifice for them to be meaningful. I honestly think it would be more interesting and more, like, character-driven to have him sacrifice himself for Robin, who is his best friend and closest confidant. She's the person who's most important to him, with the exception of maybe Dustin. But for Steve, like, he has made it obvious that it's his journey to protect others. And if he were to sacrifice himself for his friends, that would be meaningful. And you also don't need to have a romantic monogamous partner for your sacrifice to have meaning. Like, Billy died last season, I believe, and that, like, was meaningful, even though he was a piece of shit and a racist. Like, his death still had meaning, and he still protected people by sacrificing himself. And we see the reverberations of that this season with Max. He didn't have a good relationship with any of the people he saved, but his death did mean something. Steve, in contrast, has a really strong relationship with everyone in this subplot and is well loved. Basically, this season of Stranger Things forgot how to fill time without dragging its feet. I honestly don't know how they're going to write a final season of this show, considering how much they're leaving on the table right now. A lot of people have been commenting about how grown up the kids look, and it's because they're growing up. The show came out in 2016, and most of the child actors are in their late teens now, and even early 20s. The teen actors are now in their mid to late 20s mostly, with the exception of Maya Hawke, who I believe is the youngest. Joe Keery, who plays Steve, is 30, playing a guy 10 years younger than him. I don't think it necessarily ruins the show to have that child actors look more grown up. I just think that if you're writing a coming of age story and your kids are rapidly coming of age, perhaps one should figure out how you're going to do that, especially considering that all these actors are going to be pretty booked up because they're all famous now. In my opinion, a better structured version of this season would have been a really worthy finale for the show. 11 needs to defeat the final big bad and also free herself from the control and the abuse of the government. The older teenagers need to find their way in the world and decide their paths, at least for now. And the gang at large needs to either destroy the Upside Down or seal it off forever. I think it would have been a lot better if there'd been 2 7-episode halves of this season instead of 7 episodes and then 2. I would keep the first half mostly the same, except Axe the Buyer road trip and Joyce's ill-advised suicide mission. And instead, maybe the government comes knocking and tries to take 11, or Joyce makes a deal with them, with 11's consent, obviously. And we don't know, but it's to get Hopper back. Shh. Meanwhile, the kids in Hawkins proceed as they did, and without unnecessary teen drama, but as the same otherwise. And we end on the same cliffhanger. And the second half of the season opens on 11 trying to escape the government doctors, and then we get a Hopper ex machina, and he's just get your hands off my daughter, you bitch. And I really do want to see the government and these doctors who victimized 11 and many other children and ruined 11's mother's life suffer for what they did. No justice has been had for 11's mom. Her life was completely devastated by these people. I want to see these doctors suffer. And I really want to see 11 be empowered in these last couple episodes. I would want to see her making her own decisions for herself, not just using her powers, but choosing her own direction and her own path, because really, she hasn't had a lot of agency, and I want to see that for her. Honestly, I'm not all that picky about what happens for the rest of the show. I think the Duffer Brothers have done an amazing job for the most part, and I agree with a lot of the narrative choices that they've made, and I'm often surprised in a good way by how good things have been, particularly with Max's plotline this season. It was something very special that we don't get to see in television often, and I think it was really great. I'm excited to see what happens in the next 2 episodes. I do think it was unwise to renew the show for a 5th season for the reasons I've discussed, but I will still watch it. I'm still excited to see what happens. And yeah, please leave your theories and anything that you think about what's going to happen in the comments. I'm interested to see what you have to say. And yeah, bye!